Hello there, welcome to my channel. My name is Kristen. Here I like to talk about social and cultural issues through the lens of pop culture and public figures, usually but not always. Today's video is going to be going over the phenomenon of good for her movies. I first came across this concept on Twitter years ago, but I was reintroduced to it again on TikTok by user Lucky Lefty. That's LuckyLeftie. Lucky Lefty defined these movies as being movies that include a cathartic, unbridled depiction of female rage and revenge, where the rage itself is taken seriously, as is the revenge. I found this TikTok incredibly interesting, and it made me want to do a deep dive into the topic myself and figure out for myself what I think makes a good for her movie. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we talk about the movies, we need to talk about the meme, the good for her meme. So let's start there. This meme originates in Arrested Development, in which a character named Lucille, who has a lot of resentment towards her family and husband, is watching the news and overhears a blurb about a woman who murders her whole family. And Lucille's response to that news segment was, "Good for her." So this meme originated with basically a depiction of a woman who has a lot of resentments towards patriarchal systems and the social roles that are expected of her, and who, because of that experience, has a lot of empathy for women who commit acts of violence and revenge against those systems. The earliest example that I could find of this being used as a meme on Twitter to describe movies is a tweet from 2019 where somebody put up Gone Girl and Midsommar with them like shaking hands and said, you know, these are both like good for her. I'll put the tweet up on the screen because trying to describe it doesn't really make sense. But that's the earliest tweet I could find. It had like 30-something retweets, so it certainly wasn't a viral tweet, but it's the first example I can find of using that meme to talk about these movies. The first viral tweet I could find about the good for her movie subgenre was somebody tweeting about like the good for her cinematic universe, and they listed like Gone Girl, Midsommar, Suspiria, Jennifer's Body, all kinds of movies that involve a woman, you know, getting her revenge. As the meme spread and sparked more and more discussion about what is a good for her movie and what kind of moments in movies should elicit a good for her response, people had criticisms of the way this meme was being used. Some of these criticisms were essentially that the movies were being misinterpreted to like fit in with good for her. So with Midsommar, she doesn't really have any kind of plan and she doesn't really have any agency in what happens. And so calling it a good for her movie when she was ostensibly manipulated and indoctrinated into is a choice. And same goes for Gone Girl. In Gone Girl, the main character weaponizes her white womanhood in order to basically get away with and other crimes. And maybe that's not something that we should be celebrating. While some people argue that it's just a joke and we shouldn't take it too seriously, I would argue it's fun to take things seriously and it's worth having these conversations. Ultimately, I have my own idea of what makes a good for her movie and what makes a movie just have a good for her moment. And I think that that's an important distinction to make, and we'll be talking about that later in this video. The TikTok I mentioned at the beginning of this video came after all of this discourse around what makes a good for her movie, what should we include in the good for her movie cinematic universe, what should we maybe not include in it. That TikTok came after all of that. And so it had a more fully formed idea about what makes a good for her movie than just the tweets and memes that I have seen. So Lucky Lefty's TikTok basically said that in order to be considered a good for her movie, the movie must depict female rage and revenge. The woman must be taken seriously. The revenge must be a complex, like Monte Cristo-esque plan. So for that reason, Lucky Lefty said that Midsommar doesn't really fit that bill because she was manipulated. But Gone Girl is kind of the quintessential good for her movie in that TikToker's opinion because it does feature a very elaborate plan. Her rage is taken very seriously, and the movie certainly does elicit a good for her reaction while you're watching it, even if after the fact you feel a little bit sickened at everything that the main character did. So I want to build on Lucky Lefty's ideas of how to define good for her movies and how to identify what looks like a good for her movie but isn't really a true good for her movie. In my opinion, it's important to differentiate between a movie that has a good for her moment and a movie that has a good for her plot. In my opinion, a good for her moment would just be any act of female, revenge that elicits a response in the viewer of like, yeah, go for it, or, good for you kind of thing. And this reaction happens in spite of how morally wrong or dubious the action that the woman took is. You're not saying good for her because she did something that's good and right for the world. You're saying good for her because she's doing something that we all know is wrong, but we empathize with her and we see how she got there and why she did that. Just like the original meme where she was saying good for her in reference to someone bring their whole family. Just because a movie has a good for her moment, in my opinion, that does not make it a good for her movie. A true good for her movie will have good for her moments, and the movie will actually center around these moments. They're the point of the movie. When I set out to make this video, I knew I would obviously have to watch quite a few movies in order to get a good idea of what makes a good for her film. So I went online and I looked up like female revenge plot movies or something like that, and found the list of movies where a woman gets revenge in some shape or form. Read a bunch of movie synopses, and I selected 5 that I felt kind of fit into the framework that I was trying to develop. Those 5 movies are The Lady Eve, which is from 1941, She-Devil from 1989, First Wives Club from 1996, Kill Bill from 2003, and Gone Girl from 2014. So these are the 5 movies I'm going to be kind of using as reference points. And through watching all of these movies, I noticed that there was a common thread that ran through the movies and quite a few common features that each of the movies displayed. If not every feature was in each movie, most of the features were in most of the movies. So let's talk about all of the features that I identified in these movies. They all center around a typically quite elaborate female revenge plot against a male oppressor. The plot usually involves morally questionable or like very morally wrong actions. The movie allows the viewer to justify and excuse these moral issues by showing how and why the protagonist has gotten to this point and why they are targeting this specific person. It shows you kind of like what a bad person the guy is usually and what kinds of horrible things he's done to the protagonist as well as to other people. Upon further reflection, you might conclude like her actions were not actually justified, but while you're watching the movie, in the moment, you do tend to be kind of on her team. Each of these movies tend to involve social commentary around the social expectations of women. For example, the expectations of a young unmarried woman versus that of a married woman versus that of a mother versus, a female celebrity. These movies can vary in tone. Some are quite optimistic and sweet and romantic. Others are very cynical, jaded, even hateful. And these movies can be any genre. I focused on romantic comedies, and thrillers. I didn't have it in me to watch horror films this weekend, but there are also horror movies that are good for her. Some other common features in these movies include going undercover, playing mind games, publicly embarrassing the target of the revenge, having co-conspirators, a transformation of the man who was targeted due to him, learning his lesson. And that's in air quotes because, I'm not trying to victim blame these men. They also tend to include narration, montage scenes, a lot of visuals of like lists and calendars and a planning board or something. Usually, not always, the main character has kind of a change of heart or a softening of heart. In a lot of these movies, the woman who was seeking revenge against a man ends up with the man at the end after his transformation. So yeah, in my opinion, those are kind of the factors that make a good for her movie. If a movie has most of those factors in it, I think you can call it a good for her movie. And now that I've kind of explained that more in depth, I want to talk about what I really meant by like good for her moments versus a good for her plot. A movie that has good for her moments but isn't like a true good for her movie is going to have maybe some of those elements, but maybe it doesn't have a key one, such as like a plan. So like for Midsommar, it's not a good for her movie because Danny didn't have any kind of plan to do what happened at the end. It just kind of happened. In my opinion, Jennifer's Body is another one that has good for her moments, but Jennifer didn't have any kind of plan that she was executing to get revenge against the men who wronged her. So I don't think it's a good for her movie. Same thing with Carrie. She does end up, kind of getting revenge on her mom and all of her classmates, but it's not because of this like strategic, complicated plan that she enacted. It's just because she snapped and, committed an act of violence. Those are all movies that have good for her moments, but I don't consider them to be good for her movies because they lack some of the elements that I just listed. To better illustrate what exactly I think makes it good for her movie, I've got some examples, I have some clips I want to play, and just talk through the different features of a good for her movie. And yeah, so let's do that. I have a numbered list. It's in no particular order, but we are going to start from the top. And the first one on my list is the build-up. The build-up refers to usually the beginning of the movie, but if it's told out of order, it might not be the beginning of the movie, but chronologically, it's the events that take place before the snap. And these are basically scenes that show you how the woman has been wronged and how the man that she's getting revenge on in this movie has hurt her and is, a morally bad person who may deserve what's coming to him. And again, I'm not saying that anyone actually deserves some of the stuff that's done to these people in these movies, but like in the context of the movie, the character deserves it. A real life person would not deserve most of this stuff, obviously. These scenes that show the buildup are usually kind of hard to watch.
And I'm not gonna let you destroy everything I worked so hard for! A bad mother, a lousy wife, and a terrible cook! Have you looked in a mirror recently? I don't even think you're a woman. Do you know what you are? A she-devil.
Like they show you a man yelling at his wife or making his wife feel really crappy about herself or, cheating on her or otherwise mistreating her. For example, in Gone Girl, they have scenes that play with narration from the main character's diary. And, she talks about feeling like she's given up everything for her husband and feeling like he spends money without asking her. He seems like he resents her. He seems like he doesn't want her around anymore. And all this other stuff, you find out that he cheated on her and that she really feels like he just sucked everything out of her. And once he'd gotten everything from her, that's when he decided he wanted to leave her.
Nick Dunn took my pride and my dignity and my hope and my money. He took and took from me until I no longer existed.
As you're watching this movie, despite the fact that you find out later she's an unreliable narrator, while you're watching all this stuff, you're like, wow, yeah, he sucks. Get him back. Go for it, girl. And so that's kind of what the build-up scenes do. Number 2 feature that I want to talk about is the narrator. Pretty much all of these movies have at least one scene where the protagonist is narrating and kind of just telling you her plan or telling you why she's doing it. It's used, in my opinion, to help you empathize more with the main character because she's explaining to you, the viewer, everything. And so it really invites you to take on her perspective over anyone else's because she's the only one that's talking directly to you. So in She-Devil, the narrator starts talking after a lot of scenes, including the scene where she realizes her husband is cheating on her, as well as like describing what the plan is.
But like any man who runs a growing business, he always had an eye out for qualified personnel. Well, Bob, feast your eyes on this.
And Kill Bill makes heavy use of narration as well for expository purposes, but also, again, I think to help you empathize with the unnamed main character of the movie.
This Pasadena homemaker's name is Jeannie Bell. Her husband is Dr. Lawrence Bell. But back when we were acquainted 4 years ago, her name was Fernita Green. Her code name was Copperhead. Mine, Black Mamba.
The third item I want to discuss is the lists and the plans. So I already mentioned that Good for Her movies have very elaborate plans in them. What do you need to enact an elaborate plan? Well, you need, all the things you wrote down about the plan, right? So we usually see visuals of these. This can look like, marking off days on a calendar, crossing off items on a list, even like a big plan board like Charlie Day, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia style. So in She-Devil, it's pretty straightforward. She's just got like a list of 4 items that she wants to take away from her husband. In Gone Girl, it's a more complex thing. Like you see her written notes, but then you also see like her little calendar where she's crossing off things and other things like that. Kill Bill, it's just another straightforward list of names. Item 4 that all of these movies have is the montage. And you know what a montage is? It's when you see, a bunch of, scenes that are like loosely connected back to back to back. Usually with music playing over it, could also be narration. We see this in, I think, all of the movies that I'm talking about. The number 5 item that I want to discuss is the snap. This is the moment that the woman breaks and kind of realizes that she needs to seek revenge. So in She-Devil, I really liked the way that they showed the snap moment because they have her crack an egg into the skillet at the moment that she snaps because she's realized her husband is cheating on her.
My husband is having an affair with Mary Fisher.
In The Lady Eve, we get a more subtle snapping moment where she's just like really brokenhearted and saying straight up to the man that she's going to try to get revenge on later, like, if your goal was to make me feel like crap, you achieved it. Way to go, buddy.
You were just trying to make me feel cheap and hurt me. You succeeded handsomely. You ought to be very proud of yourself, Mr. Grant. Very proud of yourself. I've got some unfinished business with him. I need him like the axe needs the turkey.
Item 6 is the co-conspirators. Each of these movies have some kind of co-conspirator. Most of them, there are co-conspirators who know what's going on and who have agreed to help. There are also co-conspirators in these movies who are basically useful idiots who are being manipulated in order to assist with the plan. So we see in Gone Girl, she manipulates Neil Patrick Harris's character as well as her neighbor to help her in her plan. In First Wives Club, it's really more like Good for Them. It's actually 3 women who are seeking revenge against 3 different men. So they are co-conspirators together, but then they also pull in like one of their daughters, one of their friends and things like that to also help. In She-Devil, she actually starts a whole company in order to gain access to more people that can help her with her plan. Item 7 that I want to discuss is mind games. In most, but not all of the movies, part of the revenge plot is playing mind games with the target. We'll see this in The Lady Eve, where revenge pretty much centers around mind games. She is basically going to like make a man fall in love with her again, but telling him that she's someone else. Basically spends the whole movie like making him doubt himself and doubt his own perceptions.
Isn't your son feeling well?
What's the matter with you? Well, I mean to say, have we met?
Well, of course we have. Your father just introduced her.
Aren't you feeling well? Sure.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You meant, hadn't you met me before someplace?
Yeah.
Oh, very probably. Let me see what could it have been. Deauville.
No.
Biarritz? I know let you get.
The 8th item I want to bring up is the social commentary aspect. In First Wives Club, the social commentary is around how women are often discarded after they get to a certain age by their husband.
She probably gave Gil the best years of her life. Sacrificed her youth, always put herself last in order to bolster his ego, his pride, his ambition. And just as her dignity was hanging on by a thread, he just lopped it off by running over himself. Preschool.
Gone Girl is very well known for its social commentary from like the cool girl speech.
I loved a girl I was pretending to be. Cool girl. Men always use that, don't they? As their defining compliment. She's a cool girl. Cool girl is hot. Cool girl is gay. Cool girl is fun.
And in The Lady Eve, I felt like the social commentary was pretty subtle, but it was there in that they kind of addressed the way that young women are expected to be like pure and kind of very inexperienced with men in order to be an acceptable partner for a man.
Herman? Who was Herman? Vernon? I thought you said Herman.
Vernon was Herman's friend.
What a friend. Cecil?
It's pronounced Cecil.
And how do you mean Hubert or Herbert?
They were John's twin cousins.
John? Who was John?
The 9th item I want to discuss is the triumph. This is the moment that elicits, good for her from the viewer. It's the moment when you see the fruits of the plan, coming to life.
If you go through this, I'll have nothing. Everyone in town is looking for this guy. How can I compete? With those I'm 46 years old. I'd have to start from scratch.
I know just how you feel.
Item 10 that I want to bring up is the change of heart. This can happen before or after the triumph, but it's basically just that like scene that shows you that her heart is softening towards the man. So in She-Devil, there's a scene where she looks kind of wistfully at a photo of her family with her husband and her 2 kids, and seems like she misses them. In The Lady Eve, we see her like on a phone call trying to negotiate some divorce plans with him. She's basically saying like, I don't want anything from you. I just want to talk, because she's had a change of heart and she's realized like she really wants to be with this man. She doesn't want to follow through with what her original plan had been, which was like marry him, divorce him, and take him for all he's worth. She just wants to be with him.
I don't want any money. I don't want anything. He can have back his jewelry and anything else there is, and I'll go to Rio at my own expense. I think that's only fair. There's only one thing I want.
And the final, element that I want to bring up and show an example of here is the reunification. And so that's when the main couple gets back together. In The Lady Eve, it's when the 2 people are kissing at the end.
Why did we have to go through all this nonsense? Don't you know you're the only man I ever loved? Don't you know I couldn't look at another man if I wanted to? Don't you know I waited all my life for you, you big mug?
Or in The First Wives Club, we see one of the first wives get back together with her husband. So I hope at this point I've done a good job of kind of explaining my conception of what a good for her movie is and differentiating between a good for her movie versus a good for her moment. In conclusion, what started as, a simple joke, a simple meme to, laugh about on the internet with your friend, turned into a more serious thing to discuss. And it spawned a lot of really interesting conversations about media and about who we empathize with and why we empathize with them. And after, seeing all that discourse, that sparked my interest in just, going back to try to watch some of these movies and see if I could identify a common thread between them. These movies were kind of building off of each other, whether that was intentional or not. I think it's really cool and interesting to see how ideas like, female revenge evolve over the years and how movies and pieces of media in general can build off of one another and kind of reference one another and argue against each other and stuff like that. And when you look at the first example I found, which was the Lady Eve, to the most recent example that I discussed, which is Gone Girl, it's really interesting to see how it evolved, because we go from a very optimistic, sweet, romantic movie that ends with them getting back together in a very happy way, all the way to this very cynical, jaded, hateful movie that shows them getting back together again, but in a way that's it leaves you feeling very uneasy and very unnerved about everything that took place. I just think it's really cool. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please feel free to let me know your thoughts. And, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing. If you would like to see a more in-depth discussion of each of the films I mentioned in this movie, let me know. I think I might make videos about them, but if I do, they will go on my Patreon. If that sounds interesting to you, please consider checking out my Patreon. Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!